I was holding a crying newborn in one hand and a foreclosure notice in the other. My husband was finding himself in Italy with the $50,000 intended for our child's education, while my mother-in-law told me to just keep the spark alive. They wanted me to be a victim, but I chose to be a strategist. The locks are changed, the bank is on my side, and the man I once loved is about to face a cold, hard reality. Let me tell you how it all began. It all began exactly 4 weeks ago, in a kitchen that smelled of sour milk and the sterile scent of hospital-grade antiseptic. It was 2 a.m. in our home in suburban California, the kind of house with a manicured lawn and a massive mortgage that screams, "We've made it." But inside, the American dream was rotting from the corners. I was sitting at the kitchen island, my body still aching from a delivery that the doctors called complicated, and I called a battlefield. My daughter, Maya, had finally drifted into a fitful sleep in the bassinet next to me. I was staring at a pile of unpaid medical bills and architectural blueprints I was too exhausted to even read. My C-section scar was throbbing, a sharp reminder that I had literally been torn apart to bring a new life into this world. Then, the door to the garage opened. Julian didn't walk in like a father coming home from a late shift. He walked in like a man who had just finished a spa day. He was wearing his designer athleisure, looking refreshed, carrying a pristine leather duffel bag that cost more than Maya's crib. He didn't look at the baby. He didn't look at my pale, sweat-slicked face. He looked at the espresso machine. "I can't do this anymore, Elena," he said, his voice as smooth and cold as the marble countertop. I blinked, my brain foggy from sleep deprivation. "Do what, Julian?" "Maya just fell asleep. Could you grab the diapers from the car?" He finally looked at me, but there was no spark of recognition, no empathy for the woman who had spent the last decade building his ego and his career. The domesticity, the heaviness of it all. I'm suffocating. My therapist says I'm experiencing a level of professional and spiritual burnout that's bordering on a clinical crisis. If I stay here, I'll break. I wanted to laugh, but it hurt my stitches. Burnout? Julian worked 35 hours a week at a boutique tech firm I had helped him network into. I was the one who worked until the day my water broke, the one who managed our investments, the one who handled the contractors for the house. "You're burnt out?" I whispered, my voice cracking. "Julian, I haven't slept more than 2 consecutive hours in a month. I can barely walk to the mailbox. Maya is 4 weeks old." "And that's exactly it," he snapped, his tone turning sharp, entitled. "You've made your entire identity about the baby. Where is the woman I married? The one who was fun? You've become a martyr, Elena, and frankly, it's exhausting to be around. I've booked a villa on the Amalfi Coast, just for a month. I need the Mediterranean sun, the silence, the space to find Julian again." He stood there, perfectly composed, while I felt like I was drowning in the middle of my own kitchen. He wasn't asking for permission. He was announcing a sentence. He had already packed. He had already decided that his self-discovery was worth more than his daughter's first month of life. "How are we supposed to pay for that?" I asked, my architect's mind instinctively going to the numbers. "We just spent a fortune on the nursery and the hospital bills. Italy isn't a burnout cure, Julian. It's a luxury we can't afford right now." He gave me a patronizing smile, the kind you give a child who doesn't understand how the world works. "Don't worry about the finances, Elena. I've handled it. Just focus on whatever it is you do all day. I'll call when I land in Rome. Or maybe I won't. I really need to unplug." He didn't kiss Maya goodbye. He didn't touch my shoulder. He picked up his bag and walked out the front door. I sat there in the silence of the 2 a.m. shadows, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of his Tesla pulling out of the driveway. He was gone. He had left me in a house that suddenly felt like a tomb, with a body that felt broken and a future that had just vanished. I looked down at Maya, her tiny hand curled into a fist. At that moment, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt a cold, hard knot of rage beginning to form in the pit of my stomach. a foundation for something Julian never saw coming. He thought he was leaving a broken woman behind. He forgot that I'm an architect. I know exactly how to tear down a structure that is no longer sound, and I know exactly how to build something much, much stronger from the ruins. The silence that Julian left behind wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like the air before a Santa Ana windstorm. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, the hum of the refrigerator the only thing keeping me company until Maya's soft whimpers pulled me back to reality. I checked my phone. No, I'm sorry text. No, I made a mistake. Just a notification from our banking app. A large withdrawal has been processed. My heart did a slow, painful roll in my chest. Julian had said he handled the finances for his trip. I sat at the mahogany dining table, a piece we bought when we thought we were building a forever, and opened my laptop with trembling fingers. I didn't go to our joint checking. I went straight to the secondary savings account, the one Julian rarely touched, the one labeled Maya's Legacy. The balance read, $0. I felt a coldness spread from my fingertips to my heart. That wasn't just money. That was $50,000 left to me by my father, Frank. He had passed away 2 years ago, a man who belonged to a generation that didn't believe in burnout. Frank was a carpenter in San Pedro, a man with hands so calloused they felt like sandpaper, yet he could carve a rose out of a block of oak with the precision of a surgeon. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, I wasn't in a cold kitchen in the California suburbs. I was back in my father's dusty workshop. I could smell the cedar shavings and the old tobacco he favored. I remembered the day he handed me the battered ledger of his life's savings. "Elena," he had said, his voice gravelly from years of breathing in sawdust. "This country gave me a chance to build something. I didn't spend much, and I didn't want much. But I want your children to have the one thing I couldn't give you. A head start without the weight of debt. This is for their education. It's sacred, honey. It's the fruit of 50 years of sweat. Don't let it go to waste." He had lived in the same modest house for 40 years, drove a truck that was more rust than metal, and wore flannel shirts until they were see-through. All so he could leave that sacred gift behind. It was his American dream, distilled into a digital number that Julian had just deleted with a few clicks. I scrolled down to the transaction history. The money hadn't been moved to pay our mortgage or the hospital bills. It had been transferred to a private account in Julian's name, then spent in increments that made my stomach churn. Via rental, Positano. Yacht charter, Capri. Dinner, Ristorante Marina Grande. While I was at home, struggling to bathe our daughter because my incision felt like it was ripping open, Julian was using my father's life's work to buy vintage wine and find his soul on a boat. He was literally partying on my father's grave. The betrayal was so surgical, so precise, it took my breath away. Julian knew exactly what that money meant to me. He had been there at the funeral. He had seen me cry over those calloused hands. He had promised to protect our family. But to a man like Julian, protection only applied to his own comfort. He didn't see a legacy. He saw a slush fund for his midlife crisis. I looked at a photo Julian had just posted on Instagram, a story that popped up at the top of my feed. It was a picture of a sunset over the Mediterranean, a glass of expensive golden liquid in the foreground. The caption read, "Finally breathing again. Nature is the only true healer. Hashtag self-care. Hashtag new beginnings. Hashtag Amalfi life." The irony was a bitter pill. He was breathing because he had sucked the air out of our daughter's future. He was healing by bleeding me dry. In that moment,
The grief for my father and the shock of Julian's departure solidified into something new. It was no longer just about a husband leaving his wife. It was about a thief stealing a heritage. My father didn't work 50 years for his money to be spent on Julian's spiritual journey. I looked at the 0.00 on the screen again. Julian thought he was being clever. He thought I was too tired, too postpartum, and too weak to notice or care.
He figured I'd be so grateful when he finally deigned to return that I wouldn't dare bring up the money. He expected me to be the good wife his mother always praised, the one who suffers in silence to keep the family portrait intact. But he forgot one thing. I am my father's daughter. I know the value of $1, and I know the cost of a betrayal. If Julian wanted a new beginning, I was more than happy to give him one. But it wasn't going to be under the Italian sun. It was going to be under the cold, unforgiving light of a California courtroom. I reached for my phone, not to call Julian, but to look for a different number. I needed someone who understood that when a structure is built on a rotten foundation, you don't try to patch the cracks. You demolish it. The pain in my C-section scar suddenly felt less like a wound and more like a battle scar. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a guardian of a legacy, and the man in the villa had no idea that the martyr he left behind was about to become his worst nightmare. The morning after I discovered the empty savings account, the California sun was mocking me, streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of a house I no longer felt I owned. I was standing at the mailbox, clutching Maya to my chest, when I saw it. A thick manila envelope. Certified mail. I didn't even need to open it to feel the vibration of disaster. The return address was from the bank. It wasn't a late fee or a routine update. It was a notice of default, a foreclosure proceeding. My knees buckled. I leaned against the stucco pillar of our porch, the paper shaking in my hand. Julian hadn't just stolen my father's legacy. He had gambled our roof. While I was in the hospital, he had secretly taken out a second mortgage, using our home as collateral for a high-growth tech venture that had clearly gone south. He didn't just leave us. He had burnt the bridge while we were still standing on it. Just as the first sob escaped my throat, a familiar silver Lexus pulled into the driveway. My mother-in-law, Beatrice, stepped out. She looked as she always did, immaculately coiffed, wearing a pastel Chanel-style suit that cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and carrying a box of expensive macarons like they were a peace offering for a war she had already won. "Elena, darling," she said, her voice like honey poured over gravel. She didn't look at the baby. She looked at the notice in my hand. "You look tired. The bags under your eyes are becoming quite permanent, aren't they?" "Julian took the money, Beatrice," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of exhaustion and fury. "He took my father's inheritance, and now the bank is taking the house. Did you know? Did he tell you he was mortgaging our lives for some investment?" Beatrice walked past me into the house, her heels clicking with a terrifying rhythm. She set the macarons on the marble island, the one I had spent 6 months designing, and sighed. "Oh, Elena, don't be so dramatic. Men like Julian are built for the big picture. Sometimes the details, like mortgages and savings, get a little messy when they're chasing greatness. He's a visionary. Visionaries need room to breathe." "Room to breathe?" I followed her, my voice rising. "He's in Italy. He's on a yacht while his daughter is being evicted. Is that the big picture?" Beatrice turned to me, her eyes narrowing. The kind mother-in-law mask slipped, revealing the cold, generational steel beneath. "Listen to me, Elena. I spent 30 years looking the other way while Julian's father had his adventures. I kept my mouth shut, I kept the house clean, and I kept my husband.
That is how a woman of substance maintains her position. You've become a nag. You've let yourself go. You complain about burnout, and you wonder why your husband needs a Mediterranean escape? She stepped closer, the scent of her expensive perfume cloying and suffocating. If you lose this house, it's because you didn't know how to keep your man happy. A man doesn't leave a home where he feels like a king. You made him feel like a debtor, so he went somewhere he could feel like a god. My advice? When he calls, apologize. Tell him you'll be more supportive. Maybe lose those last 15 pounds. Sacrifice a little pride, Elena. It's a small price to pay for a zip code like this. I looked at her. Really looked at her.
I saw the hollow shell of a woman who had traded her soul for a silver Lexus and a husband who didn't respect her. She wasn't here to help. She was here to ensure the family brand wasn't tarnished by a messy divorce or a public failure. She didn't care that Maya might not have a bedroom next month. She only cared that Julian didn't look like the villain. Sacrifice? I whispered. I have sacrificed everything. My career, my body, my father's last gift. And you're telling me to apologize for being robbed? Beatrice picked up her handbag, looking bored. It's the American way, dear. The winners take what they want, and the losers, well, they complain on social media. Don't be a loser, Elena. It doesn't suit the family name. She walked out, leaving the box of macarons on the counter. I stared at them, bright, colorful, and utterly hollow. Just like the marriage I had been trying to save. I looked down at the foreclosure notice, then at the macarons, and finally at the empty space where my husband used to sit. The staggering shock was gone. In its place was a clarity so sharp it felt like a blade. Beatrice was right about one thing. The winners take what they want. But she was wrong about who the winner was going to be. She thought I was a victim of his vision. She thought I was a nag who would crumble under the weight of a legal notice. She forgot that I am an architect. I don't just look at the big picture. I draw the blueprints. I know where the load-bearing walls are, and I know exactly which one to pull to make the whole structure collapse on Julian's head. I didn't cry this time. I walked to the trash can, swept the expensive macarons into the bin, and picked up the phone. I didn't call Julian. I didn't call a moving company. I called a woman I hadn't spoken to in years, a woman who knew exactly how to handle people who thought they were above the law. The good wife was dead. The strategist had just checked in. I didn't stay in that kitchen for long. The air felt thin, poisoned by Beatrice's perfume and her suffocating expectations. I strapped Maya into her stroller, grabbed the manila envelope, and walked. I didn't have a destination. I just needed to move, to feel the California pavement beneath my feet, a solid surface that Julian hadn't managed to gamble away yet. I ended up 3 blocks over, in front of a house that stood in stark contrast to the modern, glass and steel monstrosities Julian favored. This house was a craftsman, sturdy, honest, and weathered by decades of salt air. It belonged to Martha. Martha was 75 and had the kind of eyes that looked like they'd seen the start and end of 100 empires. She was a retired litigation attorney who had spent 40 years breaking glass ceilings in San Francisco before retreating to this quiet corner of the coast. To Julian, she was that cranky old woman who complains about the leaf blowers. To me, she was the only person who had ever looked at my architectural drawings and told me they were mathematically aggressive. She meant it as a compliment. She was on her porch, deadheading roses with a pair of shears that looked sharp enough to cut through bone. She didn't say hello. She just looked at my red-rimmed eyes, the sleeping baby, and the envelope in my hand. "The bank or the mistress?" she asked, her voice like a dry martini. "The bank," I rasped, sitting on her top step. "And the inheritance, and his mother." Martha set down her shears and sat in the wicker chair behind me. "Beatrice came by, did she? Let me guess. She told you to lose weight, buy some lace lingerie, and pretend the theft of your daughter's future is just a creative hiccup in Julian's journey to self-discovery." I looked up at her, startled. How did you... I've lived through 3 recessions and 2 divorces, Elena. Women like Beatrice are a dime a dozen. They think being a doormat is a form of nobility, as long as the doormat is made of silk. But you? You're an architect. You know that if a foundation is cracked, you don't paint over it. You brace the structure, or you execute a controlled demolition. I handed her the foreclosure notice. Martha put on her reading glasses, her face turning into a mask of cold, professional calculation. Second mortgage. Forged signature on the spousal waiver, most likely. He's been busy while you were in the delivery room. She handed it back, her eyes meeting mine with a fierce intensity. Listen to me, Elena. You are currently standing in the wreckage of someone else's explosion. You can sit here and cry until the sheriff puts your furniture on the curb, or you can start the reconstruction. I don't even know where to start, I whispered. He took the savings, he took the equity. I have a 4-week-old baby and a body that's still healing. Martha leaned forward, her voice dropping to a low, commanding hum. Then start with the one thing he can't steal, your brain. Julian thinks he's playing 4D chess, but he's playing checkers with a toddler. He thinks you're a martyr. He's counting on your maternal instinct to keep you quiet and compliant, so you don't ruin the family for the baby's sake. She stood up and walked into her house, returning a moment later with a heavy legal pad and a fountain pen. She dropped them into my lap. Don't use your tears to wash your wounds, Elena. Use the law to stitch them shut. In the state of California, that inheritance was separate property. What he did wasn't just burnout. It was grand theft and financial fraud. And that mortgage? If he forged your name while you were incapacitated post-surgery, that's a felony. I felt a spark, tiny but hot, flicker in my chest. He thinks he's safe in Amalfi. He thinks he can come back in a month and negotiate his way back into my bed. Martha smiled, and it was the most terrifyingly beautiful thing I had ever seen. Let him stay in the sun. Let him spend every cent of that stolen money on expensive pasta and cheap wine. The more he spends, the deeper the hole he digs for himself. While he's finding his soul, we are going to find his assets. She leaned in closer, the scent of rosewater and old books surrounding me. You're going to go home. You're going to act the part of the grieving, desperate wife. You're going to answer his calls with a tremble in your voice. But in the dark, Elena, you're going to be a ghost. You're going to track every cent, print every statement, and document every lie. You're an architect? Good. Treat this like the most important build of your life. We aren't just getting a divorce. We are reclaiming a legacy. I looked down at the legal pad. The first word I wrote wasn't divorce. It was reconstruction. As I walked back to my house, the weight of the foreclosure notice didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like evidence. Julian thought he had left me in the dark. He didn't realize that the dark is the best place to build a trap. When I walked back through my front door, the air didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It felt like a job site. I set Maya down in her swing and did something I hadn't done since the day I went into labor. I went to my drafting table in the corner of the living room and cleared away the mountains of baby clothes, the half-empty water bottles, and the clutter of a life interrupted. I laid out the original blueprints of this house, the ones I had spent months perfecting before the first shovel ever hit the dirt. As an architect, I was trained to see through walls. I don't just see a kitchen. I see load-bearing beams, plumbing stacks, and electrical grids. I see the bones. And as I looked at the floor plan of our 3,500 square foot California Modern, I realized Julian had made a fatal error in judgment. He thought this house was a liability he could just borrow against until it disappeared. He didn't realize it was a weapon I could redesign. I pulled out my scale ruler and a fresh sheet of vellum. My hands, which had been trembling for days, were suddenly steady. Martha's voice echoed in my head. Treat this like the most important build of your life. In suburban California, zoning is everything. If the bank wanted to foreclose on a residential home, they could do it with a standard set of legal hammers. But what if the house wasn't just a residence? I started sketching. The oversized three-car garage, the one Julian used to house his project cars that never actually ran, had its own plumbing rough-ins and a separate entrance. With the right permits, it could be converted into an accessory dwelling unit, or better yet, a licensed professional studio. My mind raced. I wasn't just thinking about floor space. I was thinking about a postpartum support and architectural studio. A place for women like me, women who had been sidelined by life, by birth, or by betrayal, to find their footing again. By filing for a change of use permit and designating a portion of the property as a primary place of business for a specialized maternal health support service, I could tap into a different set of legal protections. In California, if you're running a state-recognized essential service from a primary residence, the foreclosure process becomes a logistical nightmare for the bank. It buys time, and time was the one thing Julian didn't think I had. I spent the next 6 hours working with a feverish precision. I drafted the partition walls. I calculated the square footage for a communal nursery and a quiet consulting wing. I was building a new American dream, but this one wouldn't be built on Julian's fragile ego. It would be built on my own self-reliance. Every line I drew felt like a strike against Julian's arrogance. He was in Italy, sipping Chianti and watching the sunset, thinking he had successfully rebranded his life by stealing mine. He had no idea that back in California, his martyr wife was rezoning his playground out of existence. I looked at the clock. It was nearly midnight. I had a stack of permit applications ready for the city planning office and a detailed business plan that turned our debt-ridden home into a commercial asset. By the time Julian stepped foot back on American soil, this house wouldn't just be our home anymore. It would be a registered place of business, with me as the sole proprietor and lead architect. I leaned back, the graphite from the pencil staining the side of my hand. For the first time in 4 weeks, the pain in my C-section scar didn't feel like a reminder of my vulnerability. It felt like the core of my strength. Julian had tried to tear me down, but he forgot that architects know how to use the rubble to build a higher tower. I picked up my phone and saw a new notification from Julian's Burnout Journey blog. He had posted a video of himself jumping off a cliff into the turquoise waters of the Mediterranean. The caption read, "Sometimes you have to let go of everything to see what's truly important." I smiled, a cold, sharp expression that would have terrified him if he could see it. "You're right, Julian," I whispered to the empty room. "You really should have let go of the house before I decided to keep it all for myself." I turned off the drafting lamp. The blueprints were set. The foundation was braced. Now, it was time to move into the shadows and start collecting the receipts. The next phase of my reconstruction didn't require a hammer or a drafting pen. It required a scalpel. If Julian wanted to live a life of digital nomadism and spiritual freedom, he should have been much more careful about his digital footprint. He thought he was the tech genius of the family, but he was lazy, driven by the arrogance of a man who believed his wife was too busy cleaning spit up to check the browser history on our shared iMac. I spent the next 3 nights in the war room, what Julian used to call our home office, while Maya slept in her swing beside me. Every time my eyes started to blur from exhaustion, I looked at her, then at my father's empty savings account balance, and the fatigue vanished, replaced by a cold, forensic clarity. I wasn't just Elena the architect anymore. I was Elena the auditor. First, I went after the loan documents. I called the bank's fraud department, using my professional architect voice, the one that commands respect from city inspectors and stubborn contractors. I demanded the original digital copies of the second mortgage application Julian had filed while I was in the hospital. When the PDF arrived, I zoomed in 400% on the signature line. There it was, Elena Vance. The E was too looped, the V too sharp. It was my name, but it had Julian's impatient entitlement written into every stroke. He hadn't even hired a professional forger. He'd probably used a mobile notary who was more interested in a quick $50 fee than actually verifying the identity of a woman supposedly resting in the next room. Next, I followed the money. Julian was many things, but subtle wasn't one of them. He hadn't just moved the $50,000 to a travel account. He had funneled it through a shell LLC he'd named Vanguard Horizons, a name so pretentiously Julian it made my skin crawl. He thought he was being clever, hiding the inheritance under the guise of a business investment. But he made a fatal mistake. He used our joint home address for the LLC registration. I sat there, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my glasses, and systematically printed every transfer, every business expense. There was actually a steak dinner in Positano, and every forged authorization. I organized them into a leather-bound portfolio, tabbed and color-coded. In the architectural world, we call this a punch list, a final accounting of every flaw, every error, and every debt that needs to be settled before a project is considered complete. Julian's life was about to become one giant, unpaid punch list. Then came the surgical strike. Guided by Martha's legal recipes, I didn't just call the bank to complain. I filed a formal identity theft affidavit with the FTC and a police report for forgery. In California, community property laws are robust, but they don't protect a spouse who commits felony fraud against the other. By filing these reports now, while he was still out of the country, I was effectively putting a digital boot on the wheels of his life. I spent 4 hours on hold with our private wealth manager, a man who had played golf with Julian for years and always talked down to me like I was the trophy architect wife. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Vance," he said, sounding annoyed. "Julian usually handles the Vanguard account. I really should speak with him before we place any freezes." "Actually, Mark," I said, my voice as sharp as a glass shard, "you'll speak to the California Department of Financial Protection and Innovation if that account isn't frozen within the next 10 minutes. I have the police report for the forged signatures Julian used to fund that account sitting right in front of me. If one more cent of my father's inheritance leaves that bank, your firm will be cited as a co-conspirator in elder abuse and marital fraud. Do I need to repeat the case number?" The silence on the other end was the most satisfying sound I had heard in years. I'll take care of it immediately, Elena. My apologies." By 4 a.m., I had done it. I had frozen the remaining funds, flagged the mortgage as fraudulent, and effectively cut off Julian's spiritual oxygen supply. He was in Italy with a handful of euros and a credit card that was about to turn into a useless piece of plastic. He thought he had left me in a hole. He didn't realize I was the one holding the shovel, and I was busy filling the hole in while he was still inside it. I leaned back, my neck stiff, watching the sun begin to peek over the California hills. The hunt was over. The evidence was gathered. But the most difficult part was yet to come. I had to go from being a ghost in the shadows to a performer on the stage. I had to wait for the king to return to his crumbling castle, and I had to make sure he didn't suspect a thing until the handcuffs, metaphorical or otherwise, were already on his wrists. The architect had finished the blueprints. The detective had gathered the evidence. Now, the actress was about to take her place. The transition from auditor to actress happened the moment my phone vibrated on the drafting table. The caller ID displayed a photo of Julian, grinning on a hiking trail in Yosemite a year ago. A man who looked like a partner, but acted like a parasite. I took a deep breath, smoothing my hair and adjusting my expression in the reflection of the darkened window. I didn't need to fake the exhaustion. The dark circles under my eyes were real. But I had to fake the desperation. "Julian?" I answered, my voice small, thin, and pitched with just enough of a tremor to satisfy his ego. "Elena, finally," he boomed. The background noise was unmistakable. The clinking of glasses and the upbeat tempo of a jazz band in a piazza. "Listen, I tried to pick up a vintage leather jacket in Florence today, and the card was declined. Some security flag or something. I need you to call Mark at the bank and tell him to quit playing games. It's embarrassing, Elena. I'm trying to enjoy my last week of clarity here, and I shouldn't have to deal with clerical errors from suburban California. I looked down at the leather-bound portfolio of his forgeries sitting right in front of me. I looked at the police report case number written in bold ink. "Oh, Julian, I'm so sorry," I whimpered, biting my lip to keep from laughing. "Things have been so chaotic here. The bank, they sent some terrifying letters about the house. They said something about a second mortgage and default. I've been so confused, crying all night. I think they might have frozen everything because of the foreclosure notice. I don't know what to do without you here to handle the big stuff." There was a pause on the other end. I could practically hear his gears grinding, trying to calculate if I had discovered his theft or if I was truly as oblivious as he hoped. His arrogance won the day. A foreclosure notice? Already? God, banks are so aggressive these days. Look, don't panic. It's probably just a misunderstanding with the investment firm. I'll be home in 3 days. Just try to hold it together. Did you talk to my mother? She came by, I said, injecting a dose of meek daughter-in-law into my tone. She told me I needed to be more supportive of your journey. She's right, Julian. I've been so focused on Maya and my recovery that I forgot to be a good wife. Please, just come home. I've made sure the house is exactly how you like it. I'm even looking at those new diet plans Beatrice suggested. I just want everything to go back to the way it was." "That's my girl," he said, his voice dripping with patronizing relief. He was hooked. He truly believed he was coming home to a broken, apologetic woman who would help him smooth over his financial hiccups with her silence and her signatures. I've missed having someone take care of the details. I'll see you Thursday. Have a cold beer waiting and maybe that steak I like. I've had enough pasta to last a lifetime." "I'll be waiting at the door, Julian. Counting the minutes," I whispered. I hung up and let the mask drop. My face felt cold. My heart was a steady, rhythmic drumbeat of pure, unadulterated resolve. I wasn't waiting at the door with a beer. I was waiting with a legal ambush that would make the Amalfi Coast look like a kiddie pool. While he was dreaming of steak and a submissive wife, I was finalizing the paperwork with Martha. The change of use permits were filed, the locks were scheduled to be changed the moment he stepped inside, and the process server was already briefed. Julian thought he was the king returning from a triumphant conquest. He had no idea that while he was finding himself in Italy, I had systematically dismantled the throne he sat on. I wasn't his wife anymore. I was his landlord, his creditor, and his worst legal nightmare. I looked over at Maya, who was sleeping peacefully, blissfully unaware that her mother had just turned a house of cards into a fortress of justice. The stage was set. The blueprints were finalized. On Thursday, the king would finally learn what happens when you try to build a life on a foundation of stolen dreams. Julian thinks he's coming home to a broken wife, but he has no idea the locks have already been changed, legally and emotionally. Do you think I am being too cold, or is this the justice I deserve? Drop a justice in the comments if you're rooting for me. Thursday in Southern California was a masterpiece of deception. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and a gentle breeze was blowing off the Pacific, carrying the scent of salt and jasmine. It was the kind of day that makes people believe in happy endings and fresh starts. I stood by the large bay window in the living room, watching the street. I wasn't the trembling woman who had collapsed on Martha's porch. I was dressed in a charcoal gray power suit, the one I used to wear to pitch multi-million-dollar residential projects to the city council. It was sharp, tailored, and gave me a spine of steel. At exactly 2 p.m., a sleek black town car pulled into our driveway. Julian didn't just step out of the car. He made an entrance. He was bronzed from the Mediterranean sun, his hair lightened by the Italian salt air, and he was wearing a new, unstructured linen suit that screamed quiet luxury. He looked rested, vibrant, and utterly untouched by the wreckage he had left behind. He spent a solid minute checking his reflection in the car window, adjusting his collar with that practiced, narcissistic tilt of the head, before grabbing his designer luggage and swaggering toward the front door. I heard the key turn in the lock, the last time that key would ever work. "Elena, I'm home," he called out. his voice booming with a hollow, performative joy. He dropped his bags in the entryway, the heavy thud echoing through the house. God, it's good to be back in a place that actually has decent air conditioning. The Amalfi heat was something else, let me tell you. I didn't move from the window. I didn't rush to him. I didn't offer a hug or a tearful apology for being a nag. I simply turned around and watched him. Julian walked into the living room, his arms spread wide as if expecting me to run into them. But as his eyes swept over me, his smile faltered. He didn't see the woman in the stained leggings and messy bun he'd left 4 weeks ago. He saw a professional woman standing in a room that felt different. I had moved the furniture. I had cleared out the clutter. The room felt larger, colder, and much more like an office than a cozy family den. "Whoa," he said, letting his arms drop. "You look intense. Where's that good wife I talked to on the phone? And where's that beer? I'm parched, Elena. The flight from Rome was a nightmare. They ran out of the premium sparkling water in first class. Can you believe that?" "Welcome home, Julian," I said, my voice steady and devoid of any warmth. "How was your journey of self-discovery? Did you find what you were looking for among the yachts and the $50,000 dinners?" Julian's eyes flickered. He tried to laugh it off, that charming, boyish chuckle that used to make me forgive him for everything. "It was transformative, Elena, truly. I've realized so much about our dynamic. We really need to work on your negativity. But look, we can talk about my spiritual awakening later. I'm starving. Did you get that steak? I was thinking we could open a bottle of that Cabernet we've been saving." He started to walk toward the kitchen, his pace brisk and entitled, as if he still owned every square inch of the floorboards beneath his feet. He was so caught up in his own narrative, the returning king ready to be served, that he didn't notice the silence of the house. No baby crying, no smell of cooking, just the hum of the air conditioner and the weight of my gaze on his back. "The kitchen's empty, Julian," I said, stopping him in his tracks. He turned, a look of genuine annoyance crossing his handsome, tanned face. "Empty? What do you mean empty? I told you I was coming home today. Is the baby at your mom's? Is that it? You wanted us time. Look, I appreciate the gesture, but I really need a meal before we get into whatever this mood is." Maya is with Martha," I replied, stepping toward the dining room table. "And there is no steak. There is, however, something else waiting for you." Julian sighed, the sound of a man who found his wife's dramatics beneath him. "Elena, I'm tired. I've got jet lag. Can we just do this tomorrow?" "No," I said, and the word hit the room like a gavel. "We're doing this now. Sit down, Julian. We have a lot of details to go over. You know how you feel about the big picture? Well, I've spent the last month focusing on the fine print." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a shadow of doubt cross his face. The arrogance was still there, but beneath it, a tiny flicker of fear began to dance in his eyes. He didn't sit. He stood there, clutching his Italian leather briefcase like a shield. "What is this, Elena? Some kind of intervention?" he sneered, trying to regain his footing. "Because if this is about the bank letters, I told you, I'll handle it. I just need a few days to move some funds around." "Oh, I know you'll handle it," I said, a small, cold smile touching my lips. "In fact, I've made it very easy for you. Everything you need is right here on the table." I gestured to the dining room, where the leather-bound portfolio, the one containing his forgeries, the foreclosure notice, and the police reports, was laid out under the chandelier like a silent indictment. Julian took a slow, hesitant step toward the table, and I felt the air in the room shift. The storm was no longer on the horizon. The storm had just made landfall. Julian took a step toward the table, his Italian loafers clicking softly on the hardwood floor. A sound that used to represent his success, but now felt like the countdown of a ticking bomb. He reached out, his tanned fingers hovering over the leather portfolio. He still had that smirk, the one that suggested he could talk his way out of a burning building. "What is this, Elena? A scrapbook of all the things you're mad about? He flipped the cover open with a casual flick of his wrist. Because if we're going to be petty, I have a few notes on the way you've been managing the house while I was... His voice died in his throat. The first page wasn't a note. It was a high-resolution blow-up of the signature line from the second mortgage application. Next to it was a copy of my actual signature from our marriage license, 10 years ago. The difference was glaring. An architect's precision versus a thief's haste. That's a very creative E, Julian, I said, my voice cutting through the air like a winter frost. But the bank's fraud department didn't think it was your best work. Neither did the notary who realized his license is about to be revoked for verifying a woman who was actually under anesthesia at Cedars-Sinai while you were signing her life away. Julian's face went from bronzed to a sickly, pale gray in a matter of seconds. He started flipping through the pages faster now, his movements losing their rehearsed grace. Transaction: $12,000 for a villa. Transaction: $4,500 for a private boat tour. Transaction: $800 for a dinner at a Michelin star restaurant. Each line was highlighted in a neon yellow that seemed to burn his eyes. I was investing, Elena, he stammered, his voice rising in that familiar defensive pitch he used whenever he was caught in a lie. Vanguard Horizons is a startup. I had to look the part. You can't network with the elite in Amalfi while staying at a hostel. I did this for us, for Maya's future. If that venture takes off, 50,000 will look like pocket change. Maya's future? I stepped closer, the heat of my anger finally radiating through the cold suit I wore. You took the money my father earned with his bare hands. You took the money a dying man saved for 50 years so his granddaughter wouldn't have to struggle. You didn't invest it, Julian. You drank it. You tanned it. You spent her college tuition on your own vanity because you were too weak to handle the reality of being a father. You're overreacting, he shouted, slamming his hand on the table. The noise echoed through the empty house, but I didn't flinch. I wasn't that girl anymore. So what? I moved some money around. We're married, Elena. What's yours is mine. And the house? I was going to pay that back the moment the first dividend hit. You're making this into a federal case over a temporary cash flow issue. Actually, the state of California is making it a federal case, I said, flipping to the final tab in the folder. That's the police report for identity theft and financial elder abuse, since the inheritance was technically part of a trust my father set up. And that paper beneath it? That's the change of use permit I filed with the city last week. Julian frowned, his brow furrowing in genuine confusion. Change of use? What are you talking about? This house is no longer just a residence, Julian. As of 72 hours ago, it is the registered headquarters for Vance Architectural and Postpartum Recovery Studio. By law, I am the lead tenant and the primary operator of a state-recognized essential service. And because you used fraudulent means to mortgage a property that is now a place of business, the bank has stayed the foreclosure, on the condition that I cooperate with their investigation into your fraud. I leaned over the table, forcing him to look me in the eye. The king looked small now. His linen suit looked wrinkled, and the scent of his expensive cologne was being drowned out by the smell of his own sweat. You wanted to find yourself, Julian. Well, I found you. I found a man who would leave his wife in a hospital bed to go play bachelor in Italy. I found a man who would steal from a baby. I found a man who thinks his burnout justifies his betrayal. Elena, please, he whispered, the bravado finally shattering. He reached for my hand, but I pulled back as if his touch were toxic. We can fix this. I'll go to the bank. I'll get a loan from my mother. Beatrice will help us. Beatrice? I let out a sharp, jagged laugh. Your mother told me to keep the spark alive. Well, Julian, the spark is gone. I've replaced it with a floodlight, and it's shining right on you. I've already sent a copy of this entire folder to your firm's ethics board.
I imagine Vanguard Horizons isn't going to look very good on a resume when you're facing a felony indictment. Julian sank into the chair, the very chair he used to sit in while I served him dinner.
He looked around the room, seeing it for what it was, a cage he had built for himself. The silence of the house wasn't a welcome home gift. It was the sound of a life that had moved on without him. "You can't do this," he moaned, his head in his hands. "I have nowhere to go. My accounts are frozen. I don't even have enough for a hotel." "Oh, you're not going to a hotel, Julian," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that felt heavier than a shout. "But you're also not staying in my house. Not as a husband, not as a king, and certainly not as a guest." I pulled a final document from my pocket and slid it across the table. It was a court-mandated restitution agreement, drafted by Martha. "You have two choices. You can walk out that door right now, and I let the police serve those warrants this evening. Or you stay. But not in the master suite. You'll stay in the garage ADU I've just finished designing. You will work, Julian. You will take whatever menial job the state-assigned labor board gives you, and every single cent you earn, minus a small allowance for bread and water, will go directly back into Maya's education fund until all $50,000 plus interest is repaid." He looked at me, horror dawning on his face. "You want me to be a servant in my own house?" "I want you to be a man who pays his debts," I replied. "You said you needed to find yourself? Well, you're about to find out exactly what a day's work feels like. Welcome to your new American dream, Julian. I hope the big picture is everything you hoped it would be." Julian sat in that dining chair, his body trembling with a mixture of suppressed rage and cold, biting panic. For a moment, the narcissist within him tried to claw its way back to the surface. He stood up abruptly, knocking the chair backward. The heavy wood hit the floor with a hollow thud that seemed to vibrate through the entire house. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" he hissed, his face contorting into a mask of pure spite. He tried to tower over me, using the height and the presence that used to make me retreat into silence. "You think some change of use permit and a few bank statements give you the right to treat me like a criminal? I am the breadwinner here, Elena. I am the one with the vision. You're just a glorified draftsman who spends her days worrying about nursery colors. If you go through with this, I will hire the most aggressive firm in Century City. I will bury you in litigation until you don't have enough money left to buy a box of diapers, let alone keep this house." I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I just looked at him with the same detached clinicality I used to inspect a dry-rotted beam. "You're late, Julian," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet it filled the room. "I already called your mother. I told her everything. The forgery, the theft from Maya, the foreclosure. Do you know what Beatrice said?" Julian paused, his chest heaving. He expected his mother to be his shield, as she had been for 35 years. "She said, 'A Vance does not go to prison,'" I continued, watching the color drain from his face once more. "She isn't going to hire you a lawyer, Julian. She's already moving her own assets into a separate trust to make sure your legal troubles don't touch her estate. She's protecting the Vance name by cutting off the dead weight. And right now, that's you." The silence that followed was absolute. The realization that his primary enabler had abandoned him was the final blow to his ego. He looked at his designer luggage in the hallway, the leather gleaming, the Italian tags fluttering in the draft of the air conditioner. It looked like trash. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a trap door, and the lever had already been pulled. You reported the signatures to the police?" he asked, his voice cracking, the visionary replaced by a terrified little boy. "The report was filed 48 hours ago," I said, sliding a business card across the table. "It belonged to a detective at the local precinct. Detective Miller is expecting a call from your Century City lawyers, or he's expecting to see you down at the station for a voluntary statement. If you choose the latter, and if you sign the restitution agreement I just gave you, I might be inclined to tell the DA that this was a domestic misunderstanding, that we are settling through a private labor contract." But that depends entirely on how quickly you get your bags and move them into the garage. Julian looked at the card, then at me. The arrogance was gone. The burnout was gone. All that was left was the raw, shivering cowardice of a man who had never had to face a real consequence in his life. He saw the cold, hard reality of a California prison cell versus the humiliating but sheltered life of the garage. "I have to work," he whispered, looking at his soft, manicured hands that hadn't done a day of physical labor since he'd hired someone to assemble Maya's crib. "Every day," I replied. "You'll report to the landscaping crew Martha's brother runs. You'll be digging trenches and laying sod in the California sun. You wanted to find yourself through nature, Julian? Well, you're about to get very familiar with the dirt. You'll earn minimum wage, and after taxes, every cent goes to the fund. No yachts, no vintage wine, no spiritual journeys. Just the honest, back-breaking work my father did to earn the money you stole." Julian slumped. He didn't look like a king anymore. He looked like a tenant. He slowly reached down and picked up the fallen chair, placing it back at the table with a submissive quietness that was more satisfying than any shout could have been. He realized the martyr was gone. In her place was a woman who had built a cage so perfect, so legal, and so inescapable that his only choice was to step inside and close the door himself. I'll move my things," he muttered, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Good," I said, turning back toward the bay window. "The garage code has been changed. Your new key is on the counter. Don't be late for work on Monday. Martha's brother doesn't like visionaries. He likes people who show up on time with a shovel." As he dragged his expensive luggage toward the side door, the sound of the wheels on the pavement felt like the final bars of a long, discordant symphony. I watched him go, a tanned ghost of the man I thought I loved. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I felt something much more powerful. I felt settled. The structure was finally sound. 6 months have passed since that Thursday afternoon, and the California sun is setting again, casting a long, golden glow over a house that finally has a soul. From the window of my new studio, the one that used to be a cold, empty garage, I watch the street. A dusty white pickup truck pulls up to the curb. Julian climbs out of the back. He isn't wearing Italian linen anymore. He's wearing a sweat-stained, high-visibility vest and heavy work boots coated in the red clay of a hillside he spent 10 hours terracing. His tan isn't from a yacht in Positano. It's a farmer's tan, earned one shovel load at a time. He doesn't look at the main house. He walks straight to the ADU, his shoulders slumped with a fatigue that no spiritual journey could ever cure. Every Friday, a direct deposit hits Maya's educational trust. It's not much, the wages of a laborer, but it's the most honest money Julian has ever touched. I don't feel joy seeing him like this, but I don't feel pity either. What I feel is a profound, quiet sense of equity. I didn't need his apology, and I certainly didn't need his burnout excuses. I needed him to understand that a legacy isn't something you inherit and spend. It's something you protect and earn. The main house has transformed. The Vance Architectural and Postpartum Support Studio is no longer just a legal maneuver. It's a sanctuary. This morning, I sat at the dining table, the same table where Julian's world collapsed, with 3 other women. One is a lawyer, another a fellow architect, and the third is a young mother who, like me, found herself standing in the wreckage of someone else's choices. We don't just talk about blueprints. We talk about rebuilding lives from the foundation up. We are the new American dream, self-reliant, community-focused, and unshakable. Beatrice hasn't called. I heard through Martha that she's telling her country club friends that Julian is overseeing a large-scale land development project. In a way, she's right. He's developing the land, 1 square foot at a time, with a rake and a hoe. I hope he finds the clarity he was looking for in Italy. I hope he finds it in the rhythm of the work, in the weight of the tools, and in the silence of a life stripped of pretension. I walk into the nursery and pick up Maya. She's getting heavy now, her eyes bright and curious, unaware that her world was almost traded for a bottle of vintage wine. I take her out to the porch and sit in the chair my father Frank built for me years ago. I rub my thumb over the grain of the wood, feeling the ghost of his calloused hands. "We did it, Dad," I whisper. "The fund is safe. The house is ours. The legacy is intact." I realize now that Julian's betrayal was the earthquake I needed. It shook the loose soil away and forced me to see the cracks I had been ignoring for a decade. It forced me to stop being a good wife by Beatrice's standards and start being a great woman by my father's. I am an architect. I build things that last. And what I've built here, this life of justice, hard work, and fierce independence, is a structure that will never, ever fall. As the last sliver of sun disappears behind the Pacific, I feel a deep, steady peace. Justice isn't always about revenge. It's about reclaiming your power and protecting your legacy. It's about knowing that even when the world tries to tear you down, you have the blueprints for your own survival. Justice isn't always about revenge. It's about reclaiming your power and protecting your legacy. If my journey touched your heart, please give this video a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to rebuild your life from the ground up? I'd love to hear your story. Thank you for listening.